Everyone, welcome to the Racing Squared podcast. I'm delighted to be joined by Michael Wilson, who runs Forza Bloodstock over in the United States with his partner Dominique. Michael, welcome to the podcast. You've been at the sales and the races in Saratoga all week. How's it been?
Oh, it's been phenomenal. I mean, Saratoga is kind of like, it's not quite like Royal Ascot, but you could liken it to Disneyland for adults, I guess, for us in racing in the U.S. I mean, the racing is fantastic, and the sale is usually, a heavy sale in terms of good horses. So it's a lot of fun to kind of be up here for sure.
And you've even taken us to the sales ground in terms of the background. It's not a virtual background. You're really you're on the sales grounds in Saratoga, aren't you? We can see people in the background now.
Yeah, no, they're switching out quick. I mean, obviously, we get things moving over here. So they just finished the Saratoga Select yearling sale last night, cleared out all the stalls. There's a couple horses still on the sales grounds from the previous sale, switching it over to get ready for the New York bred sale, which happens this coming week.
Perfect. So we're going to do a bit of a review of the sales in Saratoga the last couple of days. But I think before we get into it, Michael, maybe a bit about yourself, your background, about Forza Bloodstock, if you could, please.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've been lucky. I've been in this business for 18 years. Originally started on the training side of the business when I was 18, 19. My goal was to try and be one of the top trainers in the U.S. Kind of worked underneath guys like Hall of Famers like Richard Mandela, Bob Baffert, Wayne Lucas, and a couple other great trainers in Doug O'Neill and Kenny McPeak. Got a little international flavor when I did the Godolphin Flying Start program. So spent time in England, Ireland, Australia, and Dubai. And then more recently, my wife, who is an equine veterinarian, has always had a massive passion for bloodstock. So kind of we married the training background with the veterinary background and the selection process that she'd been schooled in terms of working for different bloodstock agents. And then me, looking at horses from a training perspective. We've been blessed to work with over 40 grade 1 winners. So going to a sale, working with horses like that. And then obviously I train on my own for a little bit. You can kind of identify good horses. So we set up Forza Bloodstock about 2 years ago. 2 years ago. This sale was the first sale that we shopped at. And so it's been phenomenal. Obviously we had a horse pop out. We bought 3 yearlings the first year. And the one that was bought at this sale still hasn't run yet, but he's close to debuting now. And then we picked up 2 at Keeneland, and both of those are grade 2 winners, one being undefeated, heading into a grade 1 in the next couple of weeks.
Perfect. And so being kind of a trainer yourself, kind of by background and by trade, do you think it gives you a bit of a different perspective or different edge from the bloodstock side? Because, of course, you've sourced your own horses to race. So I imagine there's certain things that you would forgive from a racing perspective or certain things you wouldn't compromise on from a racing perspective. So you really can kind of marry the two worlds rather than just perhaps buying from a bloodstock perspective to place with a trainer that then has to kind of manage the physiological aspects as you step through the stages of a horse's career.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A big piece of what we do is, we've got clients where, we don't just buy their horses, we manage their horses too. So luckily on the training perspective, I've worked on most of the circuits in the United States. The Mid-Atlantic I haven't really worked on, but used to train on the New York circuit. I've trained in Florida, I've trained in California, I've been an assistant on all those circuits. I've had horses in Kentucky before. So a lot of it for us is we can find horses for people and then figure out based on who the trainer is. I know guys' strengths and weaknesses, and what they're really good at and what they might not be so good at. So depending on who comes to us, who the client is, what their goals are, we can really try and find horses that fit, what their eventual goal is, who that trainer is going to be, and what horse will excel in his program. I think that's a big piece. And then also, as you said, from the training side, I mean, what people don't realize is that the training aspect is easy. The injury management and the keeping them sound part is the difficult side. So understanding what conformations lend to certain things gives a massive understanding of, hey, look, this horse could survive in New York and do quite well, but might not work in California. Or The back on this horse is always going to be an issue unless a rider is, so you're trying to check off boxes. I'm huge. It's something I talk about. Obviously, you do your biomechanics and you kind of put the dots on it. I see those things kind of as these horses move typically, but I'm a big stickler on good backs on horses because I have to make sure even if worse rider's on the horse that he doesn't ruin them because he can't collect them at the gallop and get the horse to use himself. So those are some of the pieces that a lot of that process goes into my thought process when we're selecting horses for people. So yeah.
No, it's great. It makes complete sense. I mean, ultimately, you have to have, say, the raw or the pure locomotive ability to be able to translate that to speed and to power on the track. But I think it's fascinating that you say there's perhaps different trade-offs you would make on different jurisdictions or maybe different states. Could you just like unpackage it a little bit? Like, what could you forgive in New York, perhaps, maybe that you could not forgive in Florida, or any other kind of trade-off type examples? Which types lend themselves to the specific jurisdictions of racing that you've got in the US?
Well, I think a big piece is, it depends, right? Each horse is its own unique physical. So it's hard for me to say, hey, when a horse has a offset left knee and it toes in, it's always going to be no, because there's so many different pieces that go with that. So I think a fine example in this sale, and I believe we touched on it in a previous video, of one of our favorite colts was Hip 85, I think. Let me double check it. He was a McKinsey colt out of a Lonhro mare.
Yeah.
And I think you scored that horse as well. And that was a horse where I felt he was if he was to be bought, he needed. So my biggest question mark on that colt was, he's by McKinsey, used by Street Sense. Street Sense is a Derby winner. Street Sense doesn't have a ton of grass horses. What are the chances McKinsey is going to be a grass sire? The Lonhro that came into that horse added a lot of substance, but he was lighter boned for a horse his size. Usually, I love balanced horses, and I didn't have much of an issue with that horse, but there was something about his biomechanics when he moved, and he didn't have soft pasterns, but they gave a little bit to where I'm like, look, if this horse can train on grass every day or train on a synthetic racetrack, he'll hold up better than training on dirt. So the one thing, and it happens in the US a lot, where people will buy these wonderful European grass horses and they come here and they don't perform. And it's not because they're not good horses, it's because they not have to withstand training on dirt every day, which is hard on horses. So those are some of the things that I have to think about when I get into different things. California used to be an easier circuit when you were looking at certain horses to buy for California because it was a tight track. And then Santa Anita had the rash of catastrophic fatalities years ago. And now that track is extremely deep. It's got very coarse sand mixed with a lot of clay. So what we're seeing in California now more and more is a lot of soft tissue injury because the track's so deep. So I have to be careful when I'm thinking of horses with conformational deviations or maybe soft pasterns, and just have to be aware of, look, this surface in California is lending to horses that can injure soft tissue. So I need to make sure that leg wise, we have strong enough legs and good enough conformation, that understanding that surface isn't going to mess with them too much. So those are the different things that kind of come into play because when a track is deep and they're training on deep tracks, not that I love deep tracks because you can get them super conditioned, and each track is different, right? So there's a training center in Florida called Payson Park, and it's known for being a really deep sandy track, which is phenomenal for fitness and getting horses ready and for keeping horses sound. But that's very different from a deep track that's got a lot of clay in it. And a deep track that has a lot of clay in it compacts as horses hit it, and it creates an unlevel surface and almost like potholes in New York. You got to be careful. So those are some of the things that I think about as we get these horses to where they are. I can't take certain horses to California based on certain conformation because it just worries me. What my job is and how I look at it is not to find. I only want to try and find stakes horses is really what I really like to try and find, but I have to minimize risk. And that's really how I look at my job is, how can we minimize the risk along the way for every single horse that we purchase? It's going to get noisy. We got a truck coming past, but we'll get back to it in a sec.
That's all right. So you mentioned the couple of the first yearlings that you sourced. So would one of them be New York Thunder? Interesting
Yes.
for us in the UK, of course, because of the ammo racing connection, and Kia Drabshan has kind of really scaled and is, you would say, kind of jostling at the top table these days with the boys at Culmore and Ballydoyle, and is really standing at the forefront at a lot of our stakes races at the moment. Can you tell us a little bit about New York Thunder himself as a yearling, what you liked about him? He was the winner, I think, of the Amsterdam Stakes, Grade 2 race in Saratoga, end of July. What's the next plans for him? And how did the link up with ammo racing come about, with Robson, with Kia? What's the story a little bit there?
Yeah, so I guess we'll start as to how we all met, which was very interesting. My wife is just a very kind person, and she was at the Fasig Tipton Timonium 2-year-old sale and was just chatting to a gentleman next to her. And he was mentioning how he, hadn't bought anything. And, my wife just happenstance said, well, I came for my husband, but, it doesn't look like we're going to get anything. These are two very nice horses. Why don't you go take a look at them? And then she walked away. And it turned out that was Kia. And he was the underbidder on one, and he bought the other one, which is a filly called Olivia Darling. Yeah. She mentioned it, walked off. I think Alex Elliott signed the ticket for that filly on the day. And then here we come up here to the Saratoga Select sale. It was very interesting. We were at the cocktail party, and somebody's waving to Dominique, and I don't know who the person is. And I asked Dominique, I said, do you know who he is? And she's like, I don't think I know who he is. So why don't we say hi? Waving to you. So we go over there and had the conversation, and that was Kia again. And then we met Robson. Robson was with him here, and it just kind of gelled, right? Robson and I started talking horses and training and philosophies and how we look at training. And then that he and I kind of really linked up over our thoughts and views. And then one horse was selected from here, a horse called Master Mojo, who's going to hopefully debut soon. And then we went to Keeneland, and Robson and I spent most of the time together at Keeneland looking at horses. And New York Thunder was interesting. I mean, obviously Keeneland's a huge sale, so we had to split up. And I saw New York Thunder come out, and he was a very, very fast looking yearling. Great shoulder, great hip. He had a slightly sickle hock when he was a yearling. He was very small too. And to me, I forgive a lot of horses for being small. Most of them grow into themselves. You rarely see a small horse once you get out here into 3-year-old divisions, unless you bought a Shetland pony. But most of them grow into themselves eventually and hit a certain stage. So the one thing that impressed me the most about that horse was, I like to look at horses to come out, stand up in front of me, and then I want to watch them walk, and I want to see how quickly they can accelerate and fall into their natural walk from a standstill. And this horse had one of the quickest first steps I'd seen in a yearling. I mean, just bounced off his back leg, immediately fell into his stride. And no matter how many times you looked at him, he had the exact same walk over and over and over and over again. So brought Robson and said, hey, can you come look at this horse? He loved him, said this is, a little rocket ship. And so the question was he going to become a racehorse or potentially a pinhook type horse? And he breezed, I believe they breezed him at the Tats breeze up sale, and then they withdrew him. I don't remember. But then they brought him over to the U.S. to Jorge Delgado. He debuted obviously on grass, which he won impressively on first time out. Then he ran on synthetic, which he won impressively second time out. Then he ran again on synthetic at 6 furlongs, which he won again. And so the Amsterdam was his first test on dirt. And then obviously he excelled on dirt. So he's an exciting horse because he's undefeated on 3 different surfaces and has speed for days. But we got lucky with him, I think. Some people will ding a horse because they're small. So, first check box to get him at a bargain. And then second checkbox was he was a cribber, which to me, I don't love cribbers. Usually that signals to me that they have a nervous kind of tendency, right? That they could get easily rattled. And some cribbers are. They stress and they're nervous, and that's why they crib. So when I go to a sale and I look at a horse that I like and it's a cribber, I very much follow that horse to the sales ring, see how it behaves in the sales ring, see how it goes into the ring. If they lose their mind, I'm off it, because what was the precursor, which is cribbing, which is the nervous, behavior, is obviously translating. But that horse owned the place, like walked in, no problem, took in everything perfectly, a very forward horse. And so he made a lot of sense. And luckily, he's still that same type of horse. When he was with Robson, he still cribbed. I asked Robson, he says, yeah, he's a bad cribber. But when he gets to the racetrack, nothing could phase that horse in the paddock. He's very easy, and seems very calm and collected.
Yeah. No, I think it's fascinating because, yeah, we have these traits. And of course, we will kind of discount or write off certain horses based on certain traits, but on a population level, it's actually quite hard to really actually then correlate that with future racetrack performance. You have to look at a full kind of population level sample and actually see what was the influence of a cribber, a windsucker, etc., etc. Do you find that yearlings that are cribbers, are they cribbers forever, or is it fixable?
Typically, yeah, right. So, the question is who they learn it from. A lot of times it's a learned behavior. They learn it from a buddy in a paddock or from their mother. And then it just becomes, because of the endorphins that they are released when they do crib, right? It just becomes a repetitive habit. The reason why I feel like it signals stress, because I'd seen it in the training environment where you had a horse that never cribbed, and then now they're nervous about different things in the training environment. So typically, yes, I've very rarely seen a horse come out of being a cribber. In the U.S., we like to paint things with cayenne chili pepper to get them to stop, or electrify the box in certain places so they don't.
Anymore.
Hopefully, it's a bad feedback loop, and they learn to stop. But typically, once they start, it's something that's there. I've dealt with it with horses in training that were cribbers that stopped becoming cribbers, because they were in an environment that they might have been stressed in, and then I put them in when they came into my stable when I used to train. I changed the environment in a way where it was more relaxing for them, so that nervous behavior would go away. But if they're cribbing as a yearling, literally all they've done is they've been in a paddock and they've been on a walker, which is as relaxed as life can be. So if it happens, it usually continues.
Brilliant. We'll go on to the Saratoga sale then a little bit, Michael. So looking at looking at some of the key statistics and some of the kind of market metrics, I mean, seems like a very strong sale. So, I mean, gross sales spend was up to $74.78 million from $66.95 million in 2022. The average was up to $488,000 from $468,000 in 2022. The median was pretty consistent at $375K across the 2 years. The clearance rate
fell a little bit.
It fell a little bit. So yeah, so 32.67% of horses didn't sell versus 25% in 2022, but pretty strong really on the kind of market metrics front. How is the feeling across the United States at the moment in terms of the overall health and the forecast for the bloodstock market? I think it was interesting when you look at the Australian yearling sales at the start of 2023. Certainly the Premier sales or the Elite sales, like the Magic Millions Gold Coast sale in January or the English Easter sale, I mean, they were super strong and they enjoyed kind of, again, sustainable growth as we've seen for the last couple of years. It was probably the middle market that suffered and actually dropped quite a lot. But how are people feeling in the States in the kind of context of the wider economic climate, and what do we think the implications for bloodstock are going to be over the rest of the sales season?
The first sale of the year for us was the July yearling sale at Fasig, Tipton in Kentucky. And to me, that sale has transitioned much more to a buyer's market. I think post-COVID, we had a lot of supply and demand issues. A lot of people were worried during COVID. They didn't buy horses. And then, as people started getting back in, then there was a shortage because everybody was trying to buy. So our market became backed up in every category, whether it was, yearling sales were bolstered because people just needed a horse. But guys who used to claim horses, now when you go to a race, it's a claiming race, there's 10, 12 people on one horse to claim. So everything was just log jammed and just backed up. And so I think now that people have secured horses, they have kind of the supply starting to meet the demand, even though we continue to have diminishing foal crops in the U.S. It's become more of a buyer's market for us, at least in the U.S. This sale, you always have to throw out the window because it's the least predictive of the actual market in the U.S. When we were at the July sale, there was a colt. It's actually very interesting. You can go look at this colt. I had an American client at the sale, found a colt that was very nice by Unified. Unified is not a very popular sire, but the colt to me was one of the best colts in the sale. And I wanted, because I felt he was a dirt horse only. I did not pass him on to Robson, my mistake. And then ended up, so I was bidding on him with my American client. And I said, look, if we can get this horse for 90,000, it's a steal. And this is that horse from that sale would have been as close as good a physical as any colt in this sale, right? But Unify is not a exciting stallion, at least in the U.S. at the moment. And so turns out it was actually Robson who outbid me over the phone with Ben McElroy. He bought the horse for 92,000 with Ben and Roger Callahan, trying to do another Valiant Force #2. But my point is, you could get a very good quality horse at the July sale by a our market's highly fashionable, right? Just as yours would be with Dubawi and Frankel and those types of stallions. When you start throwing into Mischief, Gun Runner, sorry, I'm getting a dust bath, Uncle Mo, those horses command massive attention. Everybody gets excited about them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it lends to as good of a physical as any other horse, right? So that's why you kind of have to toss out this sale. This sale is very pedigree heavy, and it's got good physicals. And when you put good physicals with heavy pedigrees, the market goes gangbusters. So, I've talked to clients saying, look, this is very much a year where we can probably buy some very good horses at good prices going into Keeneland and potentially in this next sale in the New York bred sale. So, is the market correcting? Yes. Is it going down? No. I think it's just turning back into a realistic market versus the last several years where you could find a good horse with a good physical by an average or below average sire, and you'd be bidding at 250,000 because it was the only good horse left in the sale. So I think at least from a buyer's perspective, it'll at least be helpful on that end. Hopefully the top end sales continue because we've got horses to sell next year that are well bred. So yeah, I think that's where it'll land. Is the middle market's going to be much more fair versus, and we found it last year at Keeneland. There were several horses late in Keeneland that, they were a good physical, but the pin hookers had been knocked around early because everybody's trying to buy and getting outbid in the first couple books. And so that then backed up into books 4 and 5. And then next thing you know, all the pin hookers are bidding against what's left. And you're taking an $80,000 horse and selling for $270,000. So I don't think it'll go back to an $80,000 horse, but it might be back in $150,000 range for those types of horses.
Which would be your personal favorite sale, either just because of the types that you see there, because of the kind of dynamics of the market, or just because of the overall sales experience? What do you kind of look forward to in the calendar the most?
They each have their own things. I like the July sale for sure, because I think it's early in the season. A lot of people are sitting on their budgets, so you can find good horses in that sale for very good prices. We were lucky. We found a nice filly in that sale. Got her for $47,000 because she had a chip in an ankle. Personally, I like the October sale. I do like Keeneland. I like Keeneland a lot. Keeneland is, if you were to look at me, I'm more of your sprinter type athlete. I'm high action, very quick. Keeneland is running a marathon, so I get bored really quickly halfway in, doing 21 days of inspections. But I will say at Keeneland, you can find massive opportunity because there's so many horses and it's back to back to back. You have horses selling in one book while you need to be inspecting the other book. And so you can find a lot that falls through the cracks at Keeneland. But the nice thing about the October sale at Fasig Tipton is most people have spent their budget by then. So there's good horses at Fasig that you can do well with. We found a nice Cairo Prince filly for Robson at the October Fasig Tipton sale that he pin hooked at Arcana for 160,000. We bought her for 57,000 at that sale. So, there's good enough horses in that sale that you can have some fun with for sure. So I don't know if I answered your question at all. Yeah.
No, it's good. I can only imagine it. I mean, it's tough enough doing 4,500 horses at Keeneland on the computer, but I can't imagine what it is kind of going around the boxes for whatever it is, 9 days straight or something. So yeah, it must be some job. But as you say, the scale presents opportunity, because there's always the chance something falls through the cracks, particularly something that isn't jumping off the pedigree page. So if you can do the time and the work on the physicals, and if you can look for the athletes, I think it's a good edge into that type of market.
Oh, exactly. I mean, I think, Launch and I think she's an interesting filly once she gets on dirt. When she was a yearling, she looked like she had enough of a grass hind leg where she could handle turf. But she was a $50,000 filly literally because it was booked. I don't even remember which book it was, but she was refusing to show. Wouldn't show for people, wouldn't walk. And then luckily, now she's Group 3 placed and she was a $50,000 yearling. So, profit will be made there too. But I think that's where it gets interesting is yearlings get tired and people get tired and they get really impatient. I've seen people pull out a horse and they don't even let it walk 2 strides before they're like, no, I don't need it. And they prejudge a lot to try and shorten how much. So if you've got a team or a wonderful wife like I have who wants to look at 4,000 horses, you can find some good ones.
Yeah, and the good thing for me is the computer doesn't get tired, so the computer is still performing the same as it is on yearling number 1 of the sales season and yearling number 10,000 of the sales season. So
exactly.
So looking at the top performing vendors, Michael, from the select sales, so TaylorMade were the leading consignor by gross, 10.4 million for 11 sold. Would like to talk about Hill and Dale, actually, kind of an operation that I'm fascinated with a little bit from the UK and kind of what John Sakura does. So Hill and Dale had both the top priced colt, the curling colt, and then also the top priced filly from day one. A little bit about Hill and Dale then. I mean, they must be doing something right. John Sakura must have some magic. I mean, they've got curling on the roster there. I believe they've got the best second crop sire in the world in Good Magic on the roster there. I don't know what's the special sauce that they're using. No pun intended.
Yeah. No, I mean they do a very good job. They've always done a good job managing stallions books. They're quite selective in terms of what can get into certain sires, which I think does help those sires overall. I think we got lucky one year because we looked at a lot of yearlings and we thought Good Magic was going to hit. So we had Good Magic in our mind, but we really wanted to send the mare to Charlatan. But Charlatan was only available to graded stakes placed fillies or graded stakes placed producers. And this was a filly that was out of a grade 1 placed mare, but she was unraced. So she got turned down to go to Charlatan, and we got her in full of Good Magic, and she got a beautiful fall on the ground. But that's, I think, part of my point is, they do take a lot of time in looking at which mares are coming to them, which ones are probably good physicals for their stallions. They do a phenomenal job with how they manage that roster. I mean, another horse which I think could have in other operations might not have been as successful as Violence, Forte sire. Medaglia d'Oro years ago was a phenomenally popular stallion. He's still fairly popular now. You had a lot of people trying to see if they could bring up the El Prado in him and make him into a grass sire. And, I think that didn't help his stallion career versus, I think with Violence, they've done a very good job of managing that stallion. So they do a great job. The Gunrunner filly that was sold through them, we know the individuals who had that filly who bought her and then sold her through Hill and Dale. But they did a phenomenal job showing her Randy Hartley and Dean Dorenzo. And then there's a new group that's entering into racing where the ownership on that filly, a gentleman named Rich Mendez, with Dean Dorenzo and Randy Hartley. And so Randy Hartley and Dean Dorenzo prepped her in Florida and brought her up, and then Hill and Dale consigned her. So they did a phenomenal job making that filly look exceptional down there at their farm in Florida. Those gentlemen are mainly 2-year-old pinhookers. They buy weanlings and yearlings to consign as 2-year-olds. They're now doing a foray of, if the weanlings look good, we'll put them in a sale like this and let them go. So I think personally, we might be talking consigners, but we know a couple other things. So I think they did a phenomenal job as much as anybody. Dean Dorenzo and Randy Hartley, they brought $1 million worth of horse flesh to the sale, and they had $3 million worth of sales. So $2 million profit on 3 horses. And one was consigned by TaylorMade, one was consigned by Hill and Dale, and then the other one was consigned by Summerfield.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. So we touched a little bit on curling there. It's quite fascinating because I was in the prep for the sale. I was obviously just getting into some of the traditional kind of stallion statistics, and I mean, you look at all of the sire tables over in the US, and you've just got Intermischief and Curlin kind of fighting it out consistently at the top. I mean, they're both on very similar fees now. Intermischief's on, I think, is it $250,000? Curlin's on $225,000. But what was remarkable for me was almost the consistency in their performance over the course of their stallion career. I think they both went to stud in the same year. Was it 2009? And if you look at like some of the metrics, and I've got them in front of me, runners to foals, Intermischief 72%, Curlin 70%, winners to foals, Intermischief 53%, Curlin 51.6%, stakes winners to foals, Intermischief 7.9%, Curlin 7.6%, group winners to foals, Intermischief 3.86%, Curlin wins this one 4.15%. So it's just remarkable, really. There's so many. Kind of who is the best sire in the US at the moment? Can you tell? Can you strike an inch between them or not?
Yeah, I think Curlin has been impressive, right? And he was, he retired. So they started their careers out very differently. I was lucky enough to work with Intermischief at Richard Mandela's. We had him when he was a racehorse, and he was a very interesting horse that came in. He debuted, and then he broke his maiden second time out, and then he won a grade 1, and then he was on the shelf, came back, won the Damascus on the Breeders' Cup undercard, ran in the Malibu, ran second, and then was retired. B. Wayne Hughes had just bought Spendthrift at the time and had needed some stallions, so put Intermischief on the farm with no fanfare, right? He had been forgotten pretty much. Plus, he was winning on synthetic racetracks. Everybody said, oh, he's a synthetic horse. So, he started his career where people were begging for mares for him. And then he had 2 horses in the Kentucky Derby in his first crop, one being Vijack and the other one being Golden Sense. So it's very interesting seeing how he fought his way through the ranks, from being a stallion that I think he initially stood for 5,000 and then has worked his way up to being what he was. Obviously, Curlin was different. Curlin was an impressive winner down at Gulfstream. Kenny McPeak had bought that horse and then took a slight break. So it was trained by Helen Pitts, who was his assistant trainer at the time. He sold Curlin privately. Asmussen then took him over Stone Street, and then Curlin became Curlin. Just this monster of a horse on the Triple Crown Trail. And then 4-year-old, he was the beast from the East, just beating everybody up. And then everybody was excited to see the Curlin Zenyatta showdown. So he retired with a lot of fanfare. And it was interesting early on because he had Palace Malice early. And then he kind of had a couple years where he might have lulled a little bit. And then certainly has recovered and stamped himself as a premier sire. What's interesting with him now is obviously we're seeing with Good Magic. I think we'll see the same with Vino Rosso. Is a sire of sires. he's got some sons that are going to stud now that have a little bit more speed in them, because he's a big, meaty horse. And I think now that he's getting more horses that have a little bit more speed in them, like Good Magic was an extremely good 2-year-old who then, stayed good as a 3-year-old, just happened to run into, I believe it was Justify, when he was a 3-year-old. So that horse is throwing precocious good horses. Vina Rosso, he came along, he really became his best horse as a 4-year-old. But I think now that his sons are coming out, you're seeing the mark that Curlin's going to make on the breed for sure. Into Mischief is just, I think personally, he would be like our, I don't know how we would liken him. He's not quite Galileo yet. He's certainly kind of like Dubawi. He was interesting where he adds athleticism to horses and adds athleticism in spades. Curlin is a sire who is a very good sire, and he puts more substance into horses. So if you have, like, I had a filly that I loved at this sale who was a Speightstown filly out of a Curlin mare, and the Curlin mare added the 2-turn ability into the sprinter body of a Speightstown. So it was really neat to see that substance and that stretch and that 2-turn ability in a horse that, to add into a sprint sire to become a 2-turn sire, try and make a 2-turn horse out of that. So I think not only, and I think we're already starting to see it with Into Mischief as well, is Curlin's going to be very interesting on the broodmare side when they start breeding some of these fillies to, sprint type sires that lend to having some of these horses that now have speed to go route distance, but enough speed to be precocious.
It's fascinating, the parallels really between, say, the story you said there with the Into Mischief and, say, a sire like I Am Invincible down in Australia. I mean, started off also on a very kind of lowly fee. I think it was 11,000 Australian dollars, and then has been kind of dominant at the top of the sire charts and battling it out with Snitzel for the last couple of years. And it also kind of tells the story a little bit about how making sires isn't in some ways a perfect science.
Yes,
it's a very difficult game to predict, but in some ways that's where the magic is, and that's what kind of keeps us excited and keeps us coming back.
Absolutely.
Who would be we'll go to first kind of crop sires after this, but any particular sire at the moment, maybe kind of active, say first season sire with runners on the track, or maybe second crop sire? Who's your next breakout sire in the US? Who do you particularly a big fan of at the moment, Michael?
I put a lot of stock in Omaha Beach. He was one where, Good Magic, I think, has proven himself already that he's going to be a very good sire. So I don't think there's nothing hidden about him anymore.
Yeah, he doesn't qualify. Yeah.
But last year, I was extremely impressed. I loved Omaha Beach as a racehorse. The nice thing in the United States is there's a major East Coast bias in everything. So they discount West Coast horses. So when he retired, you're looking at a horse that at the age of 3 won a grade 1 at a 1.1 miles and won a grade 1 at 6 furlongs. And it's very rare to see that in any type of horse, especially in the same year with a 3-year-old taking on older horses, right? So he won when Richard Mandela gave him a brief layoff after he had an entrapped epiglottis, missed the Kentucky Derby, and then he tried to bring him back at Del Mar. The horse got sick, couldn't debut at Del Mar, debuts in a grade 1 sprint race at Santa Anita at 6 furlongs. And, even myself, I'm like, what's this horse doing in a 6 furlong sprint? And then he just mows him down and wins 6 furlongs, and then ran a great race in the Breeders' Cup Mile in the second start. When we went to the sale, I was excited to see what he would produce last year. And I could say, on every short list, we had at least 2 Omaha Beaches in every book at Keeneland. And after we saw that, we've got some clients that have some nice mares, and I said, look, go to Omaha Beach. He could be the sleeper stallion that becomes the next, Into Mischief, Curlin, that type of horse. If you look at that stallion's female family, he's got one of the best female families in the country. So he's very exciting to me because as well, he's by Warfront. So he's by Warfront out of a dirt American female family that includes, his second dam is Take Charge Lady, which has produced Will Take Charge and produced Take Charge Indy and produced, just very good two-turn dirt horses, which obviously he was. So you're seeing at these sales that he can get you a turf horse and he can get you a dirt horse. And as we're seeing these 2-year-olds run, they're performing on both. So I think he's one to very much keep an eye on as who's going to creep his way into the premier stallions. As to what has foals on the ground now, or horses running currently, we're talking first season sires with yearlings. Authentic is the obvious choice. I mean, he's very much stamping all of his babies like Into Mischief does. You can see a lot of authentic coming through them, which is one of the traits that probably makes Into Mischief so good. And the good sons of Into Mischief is they very much stamp their offspring. And he's certainly done that with some of his horses. He had a filly sell for $800,000 last night. His first yearling that sold was $475 at the July sale. She was the sales topper there. So he would be the one who, he's no sleeper by any means. He won the Kentucky Derby, won the Breeders' Cup Classic, but he's a very solid stallion as well.
Yeah, looking at the kind of gross spend there, I mean, he had 16 hips in the sale, I think, but I mean, he was third overall on gross spend. So after Into Mischief and Curling. So yeah, the market's quite clearly gone for him. It's interesting you say Omaha Beach as well, because the fortunate thing for me is that I get a number on every yearling that I score kind of across every sale in the moment in the Northern Hemisphere or the Southern Hemisphere. And certainly Omaha Beach of the US sales that I scored last year had the highest proportion of highest kind of highly rated horses kind of on my numbers. So I was expecting good things from him. Vino Rosso would have been second. So Vino Rosso would kind of be my second pick for the States. Blue Point was top last year in the kind of the UK or UK and Ireland kind of sphere. So it's good to see him pulling through. Two Down Hot was second. He hasn't really caught fire yet, but he's a type that's kind of has a tendency, they're probably going to be later maturing types. So I expect him to be a little bit like Harry Angel was last year. They're going to mature and they're going to start kind of catching fire from September onwards. So expect the UK based yearling sales maybe to be a bit quiet on Two Down Hot and the earlier sales like the Goffs Premier, but maybe as we get kind of later into the autumn, you might see a couple of winners and even a couple of stakes winners starting to pull through. And also looking at the scores for Authentic as well, I think so. I scored 14 of his 16 hips that he had offered, and 4 of those had very high elite biomechanic ratings. Hip 218 out of Wicked Lick was my top rated one at 95%. But like in terms of proportion of yearlings offered and then the scale of the ratings, it was like a really strong performance.
Well, and what's interesting about Authentic, and a lot of people might not know who weren't maybe, I wasn't around him, but I saw him enough to see. I was in California at the time. So he was a very narrow horse when he was younger. So early in his 3-year-old campaign, if you put I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but he very much benefited from that COVID Kentucky Derby being in September. So he was a horse that had tons and tons of raw athleticism, but he needed more time to fill into his frame and build on substance. And so as we're seeing these yearlings, I mean, the filly that sold for $800,000 to Wayne Lucas, she's different. She was much more, had a ton of substance, just a massive, gorgeous filly. But a lot of them, what I'm seeing in the Authentics is very similar to him. They're a little bit narrow, but they will probably mature into themselves if you give them time. So he might not be a stallion that comes bang out at 2. Whether it was the Mr. Greeley in him on the bottom side that kind of leaned him out when he was a racehorse, but he was very much, my wife calls them fish, from the side they look good, and then you look at them from the front and they're very narrow. So he was kind of like that early on in his career, and then as he got towards the Derby and the Breeders' Cup Classic, he thickened out. And that stud, he's not as substantial and thick as Into Mischief. He's a lighter version, but he's a gorgeous horse. So, I think same thing with the Vino Rossos. Those were horses when we looked at them as yearlings that we said they're going to be 3-year-olds. They're not going to jump out at 2. They might run at 2, but they will mature into themselves at 3. But I think he's going to be similar. So, hopefully people don't. We tend to, in the United States, if they don't come out bang within the first 2-year-old year, they give up on him. But I think he's going to be very good once they fill out as they get older and older.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the good thing for Vino Rosso, I think he's got a stakes winner already, hasn't he? Is it the Wine Steward? So he already got one on the board. So the market will stick with him, I think, as we progress through the season. No, very, very good. Maybe to wrap it up, Michael, maybe some predictions from each of us. Maybe three picks to take out of the sale and try and find a stakes winner. Very tough out of just 3, but who would be your top 3 takeaways? And then I'll do 3 as well. And in 2 years, we can look back and see how we did.
Okay, so let me get my short list pulled up on my iPad, and I will tell you exactly who I think. So I really liked Hip 18 in the sale. He was a McLean's Music. He had a ton of substance. He was more sprinter type. He reminded me very much of New York Thunder. And he had a lot of substance to where he's more like Jackie's Warrior than your typical McLean's Music. What I loved about this horse was biomechanics. He was the same horse day 1 as he was the night that he sold 3 days later. So nothing changed in his stride. He was a strong little horse that I think will be a very good sprinter type and progress going forward. So I loved him. People gave me a lot of shtick saying, well, your best horse of the sale was only 250,000, but I'm going to stick with it and say I think this horse is going to be a stakes horse.
Yeah, well, you only need to go back and look at the historic sales results, and then you see how the horses that sold for over $1 million what proportion of them turned into stakes winners. I think it's 15%. So 85% didn't. So the market doesn't always get it right. There's some signal there, but it's not the be all and end all.
So let's get your first one.
Okay, I got my top one then. I'm gonna go Hip 110. That's a curling colt. Mopetism was offered by Denali Stud. Eclipse Thoroughbred Partners picked him up for 825k. I had a really high biomechanics score for him, 95.53%. There's me slating the market. I do find that actually when I combine the kind of the pre-sale biomechanics scores and then with kind of, well, basically higher spend in the market, that tends to kind of increase the subsequent probability of horses kind of turning out into a stakes level. I guess it's because the market at that point has all of the information. It has the collection, summation of all of the opinions of all of the judges on the sales ground. You have the information kind of in that money line of the vettings and kind of the physical inspections. So it kind of uplifts my probabilities there. So that's why I like to combine them. He's the first foaled out of an Uncle Mo mare called Mopetism. She was the winner of the Grade 2 La Canada Stakes at Santa Anita. And she was the winner of the Grade 2 Canada Stakes at Santa Anita. Yeah, and I just thought he was a lovely colt. And I really liked his profile. And I like first foals as well. I like to get in on first foals before there's anything necessarily on the page, because then you start to get even more priced out of it.
Yeah, no, he was a nice horse. I remember seeing him. He was a good mix to where, Curlin and Uncle Mo seemed to help him out very well. So no, I think that's a good pick. Let me see, because there's a lot of horses that I love. I did say my favorite filly in the sale was Hip number 7, who was a Speightstown filly out of a Curlin mare. She's Canadian bred. I think that hedges my bets towards, if she goes to Canada, she'll beat up on all the Canadian breds and certainly become a stakes winner. But I liked her enough where I thought she'd be a very good filly either way. So that was my favorite filly in the sale on her. So I'm going to stick with Hip number 7 as well.
Nice. I should have picked a filly. I think I picked 3 colts. So I'll go for my next one. I'll go for, we've talked about authentic. So I'll go, I like to pick a first season sire. So I'm going to go Hip 218, authentic, Wicked Lick. offered by TaylorMade, picked up by CJ Stables, $325,000. So a little bit below the market median. So again, as you said, maybe people would crab me for that, but yeah, I thought he was a beautiful colt, and happy to back Authentic a little bit with that one. Did you happen to see him in person?
I did. We're talking hip 218. Let me pull him up on the iPad.
No, you tell me you didn't like him, and you tell me all the problems.
No, let me look him up. 218. He was a good colt. Slightly immediately offset knee, rotates out both front. So no, I didn't have too many issues with him. He was a horse that did make my list. I liked him. I don't remember him off the top of my head in terms of exactly how he looked. TaylorMade 218. Which barn was this colt in? Barn 10. No, he was a good colt. They had so basically TaylorMade was split between two barns. Barn 10, which is very nice to go see, had all of the standout colts over there in barn 10. So that's where the Beholder Curlin was in barn 10. This colt was in barn 10, and then the Tappa that sold for $1.2 million was in barn 10 as well. So now I have to get creative here with horse number 3, because I once said it on a podcast, and then somebody put the data to back my statement. Most Grade 1 winners are bought between 150 and 300,000. So I need to get creative on this. There's a Pollock article, if you look at it. I said it on a podcast once, and Ray Pollock went through 10 years of research of Grade 1 winners in the United States. So there were only 2 Grade 1 winners in the past 10 years bought for over $1 million, and only 12 that were bought for over 500,000. So most fall in the $150,000 to $300,000 range, which is why this sale is tricky for me to pick number 3. Let me go through this. That horse was a substantial horse. You know what? One of my favorite colts in the sale. Gosh, there's so many of them.
This is the challenge. That's why it can only be 3.
That's why it can only be 3. All right. So I have a ton of respect for Donato Lani. I think he's phenomenal at selecting horses. And I've always looked up to him as an individual. So he picked and selected one of the horses that was my favorite, which is Hip 49, who's a quality road colt out of a Smokin' Frolic mare, Frolic's Dream. So he was an extremely nice colt. The entire Bedouin consignment had 3 horses, and they were all exceptional. So he was very, very nice. He'll obviously go to Bob Baffert. He's very much your 2-turn Kentucky Derby type colt. So I'm going to swing for the fence, and it's either going to be he's going to hit or we're going to buff. But I thought it was a really nice horse that he bought.
I'm just give me a second, because I'm just fascinated on what you've just said. I'm just running I'm just running something on the or maybe I'll do it afterwards. I'm going to post it on the video afterwards. I've got all of the historic sales results and then mapped to kind of subsequent racetrack outcomes. So I'm going to run that query on kind of the average cost or the median cost of Grade 1 winners, and I'm going to post it to the podcast afterwards. It
might have shifted in the last couple of years in the United States, but typically that was the price range where you would find really good horses at yearling sales. But now that we have everybody teaming up, right, we've got syndicates teaming up with syndicates and large owners partnering with large owners, all the prices have been accelerated up. But Ray Pollock, I could send you the article. He put that out last spring on a 10-year study.
Yeah, I'm going to do that afterwards. Good. So my final selection would be Hip 171. That is a Not This Time colt out of a mare, Spatestastic. West Bloodstock bought that for Rapol, Bloodstock and Spendthrift for 725. I thought he was a beauty of a Not This Time colt. 96.23% on my biomechanics scores, and as you can tell, I'm a bit of a sucker for the numbers. But like just looking, Not This Time obviously hasn't had as kind of many foals on the ground as like the Curlins and the Intermischiefs of the world. But when you look at some of the metrics, like it's quite phenomenal. Like runs to foals 78%, and if you can recall the the numbers before. Winners to falls 56%, stakes winners to falls 9.85%, group winners to falls 4.01%. I mean, if not this time keeps that up, that is super elite performance. So yeah, kind of based on those traditional metrics combined with a super strong biomechanics score, he's going to take my my third position.
There you go. No, he's an exciting sire. You know, I think you know, being a fan of European racing, my father is English. The Iron Horse Giants Causeway is always a favorite of mine, and it's been
we have a new one though. Do you know we have a new Iron Horse?
Who?
Paddington. He's the new Giants Causeway.
There we go.
So they say anyway. Yeah.
Aiden tends to dub everything, you know, the best horse I ever trained, every single, you know. So I was wondering when they'd reuse the Iron Horse. It's interesting. It's been interesting and slightly disappointing that he hasn't had a sire son till now that has taken up his mantle, but it's exciting that not this time. It's certainly looking like he'll extend, you know, what Giants Causeway was able to do. So I agree with you. I think he's a phenomenal sire. There was several in this sale that were exceptional. Hip 20 was a filly that I really liked. She was in my top 3 or top 4 fillies. Hip 20 was not this time filly. And then Gainesway had a not this time colt who was an absolute monster. So I think you are correct in hedging your bets there. That's a very good sire.
Cool. So let's see how they go. So hey, Michael, thanks a lot. Thanks for the little tour of the background of the sales ground of Saratoga, and yeah, thanks for all of the insight from the sales over the last couple of days. It was really fantastic. Great to talk to you.
Absolutely. No, absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.